Hey, this is Ed Brown. Welcome to the Ed Brown Show. Boy, we got some hot one, and we got our buddy here, you know. He's going to be telling us about the different things, you know, Michael Braxton, and it's a lot of things. We got Alzheimer's, you know, that we're coming up next week. Then following that, we're going to have a piano player. We'll be taking it easy. Well, right now, we got old Michael Braxton, and you know who he is now. I mean, he's a young man that keeps the foreign affairs going here on the Ed Brown Show, and we're going to talk about. You've seen scenes of the people actually drowning and things of that nature. We're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about a few other places. But welcome, Mike.
Thank you very much,
Brown
Mr.
Show.
Brown. It's a pleasure to be back with you.
Okay, well, I want to, you know, as far as Alzheimer's, we talked about this. We're going to have a young lady, Ms. Baltimore, and she's going to be on there the 20th. Then we're going to have a great piano player that's going to be coming on the Ed Brown Show. We sort of lighten things up a little bit.
That's great. I'll be sure to watch.
Right, but right now we want to get into this. You've seen these pictures of the people drowning over in the European area. Now, give us your take of that. Why is that happening?
That's an excellent question. If you can imagine the circumstances that would drive you from your home, be your home in Eritrea or Somalia or even or Ethiopia, usually it's a combination of poverty, illiteracy, civil war, civil strife. When all three of those converge on a family that perhaps no longer has a father or a male figure at home, the mother may be illiterate with 2 or 3 children and is facing more poverty each day.
Yeah, but that condition was created in the past. The fact that their natural resources, most of it, as you know, most of the Europeans are the ones, they tried to colonize all of those countries, and they did colonize some, and they took their natural resources, and there was no return for the people. And then the irony of the whole thing, and then the so-called natives, they become gangsters, you know what I mean? And so they didn't, the little money that they received for the natural resources, the guys that they put it in their pocket.
That's a very interesting point. They're probably, I know, easy to obtain figures for the extent to which Africa and colonies in Asia were deprived of their natural resources. And certainly the people who are escaping are not people who necessarily would have had access to those natural resources, even if it were a fair system. Mm-hmm. What we do know is that the general principle of colonialism was such that an elite would settle on a given colony, extract the resources, empower a native ruling class, and that ruling class would keep the natives in the country, the poor natives in the country, both poor and quiet. Mm-hmm. What we're seeing now is perhaps a scramble for power in these former colonies. These societies are impoverished, and the most impoverished, having been exposed a little bit to the fact that the rest of the world lives better than they do, are voting with their feet, as we sometimes say, leaving, going to the nearest port that they can reach.
But there's no future. They don't know. I mean, you're going somewhere where it may be worse than where you left.
They can't imagine that. That is, you put your finger on the tragedy of the whole situation. Yeah. If ever a poor person gets to the point where they cannot imagine any place else in the world being worse than their own home,
their own environment,
then you can appreciate what drives them to the ports in Libya and what drives them to try to cross the Mediterranean Sea. Another problem that they encounter is the rapacious and greedy people who are selling them seats on the boat. Mm-hmm. crossing the Mediterranean Sea.
And these are their own natives. All right?
No, not
No?
necessarily. They're often natives of Libya or the surrounding region who have access to boats, and they're fairly well organized, I'm told. And if they encounter difficulties, these people might never reach their European destinations.
Okay, with all our communication advances and things of that nature, you would think the UN, they would feel that this is a critical moment when individuals have to reach this state in life where they have to put their life on the line, and that's what they're doing. They're putting their life on the line. And why isn't it that the United Nations hasn't, they know these, just like the information you know who's doing it, who's bringing the boats, and who's selling the boats. Why doesn't they stop it?
It's hard. The politics of powerlessness is really hard to get a global consensus on. First of all, these people are coming from societies that were historically colonial societies.
Right.
And
but they were created by the Europeans.
Therefore, third and fourth world societies.
Right.
The vote for allowing these people to come into European countries already burdened by immigrants from Eastern Europe who are not totally conversant with how these Western societies work. The idea of these people also adding their weight to these already overburdened welfare systems is fairly controversial in Western and Nordic Europe.
Well, really, they don't have a solution. That's what you're saying?
What I'm saying is they're working out a solution, and I have a feeling that compassion is beginning to dawn in the hearts of many European policymakers now. And now we see Italy is sending its navy out to save some of these ships, and people are brought in, and they're beginning to receive medical treatment. This was not the case a year or two ago.
Well, why isn't it the European nations, was it Europe?
EU.
Why aren't they getting together? Because this was a problem that they estimated, really. Because of the situation. I know with the natural resources, they're the ones that benefited from the natural resources that they got from the African nations.
One of the, I've always thought that's a very interesting point. I've always thought it was interesting that if you are a colonial power and you exploit a colony, and then at some point in history, you are no longer the colonial metropole. Why is it that you don't expect the people in the former colony to come to your country on the expectation that life is better in the metropole than in their colony, their former colony?
Right. Well, it's the same thing that we have here as far as immigrants. As most of the United States is made of immigrants. They're to the point now where they don't want any more immigrants involved in it. And the same thing is happening with the European nations, where they have actually taken all the natural resources out of Africa, and now they expect the people to develop a stable government with no funds.
Well, some of that mismanagement that resulted in no funds is the fault of those who came after colonialism ended. That certainly is the case, but I think you do make a fair point. What we know is that certainly in World War II, the British Empire and French colonials added a great deal to the armed forces of both of those countries. And we know that following wars in Vietnam and in Korea, people from both those countries came to the United States in the full expectation that life would be better in the United States than their home countries.
Well, actually, what happened too is that with the World War II, with the Japanese, you know, and they migrated here after the bomb was dropped, and people accepted them.
Some did, but what's not commonly known is that more Japanese immigrated to Peru and Brazil than the United States, because, as you can well imagine, immediately after the war there was some natural animosity between the Japanese and the Americans. But they did immigrate to Peru and to Brazil, so much so that, do you remember the president of Peru was a man by the name of Fujimori? That is a pure Japanese name.
Well, getting back to the African situation, how do you feel that they can come up with a solution without a war?
I suppose that's a very hard question, Mr. Brown, and I have to admit that's a little bit beyond that's way beyond my expertise. But I suspect that we're going to need a lot of help from the United Nations, and not necessarily armed help, but help that goes in and begins to negotiate between the sides that are causing the political tension that is resulting in civil strife, so that people with very slender credentials, or who are in fact illiterate, can remain and have some semblance of a life in those countries, especially countries like Eritrea or Muslim countries, because those people immigrating to Europe represent a complication in the larger fabric of terrorism.
Right. But what happens is on the continent of Africa, there you have Muslims, and you have but when they think of Africa, they always think of the natives of Africa, but they didn't include the Muslims. Muslims, they're part of the continent of Africa.
Well, exactly. I mean, these people have as much of a right to immigrate as anyone else.
Yeah.
But the public perception after the attacks at Charlie Hebdo, the public perception is going to be a little bit more nervous and tense.
What? Because of the fact of
with the prospect of more Muslims immigrating to Europe.
Because some African nations tried to get into the trade business by stopping the ships going through the canal and by hijacking them. But you notice that didn't last long. They hijacked a few ships. Then all the navies, including ours, in the European Navy, Sudan, I think, was the one that were hijacking Somalia, okay. Right. I know it was an S.
Right.
Somalia, right? Okay, now, what happened with that?
I think there was, I don't know the inside story, but I think those groups realized that this was a losing proposition. Also, Kenya lent some military muscle to be applied against the Somali tribes that were trying to exploit the ships passing the Somali coast.
Right.
And that business died off fairly quickly.
Right. Because I think it was affecting the whole world trade, in fact.
It was. It certainly was.
Yeah, because although they had the goods, if they hijacked, and then the hijackers they ran out of places to get rid of it.
Absolutely.
You know, who's going to buy it?
That's right.
And see, so I mean, so the interest there, you know, they sort of lost interest with that because they shut off the ability to sell the goods.
And I think Al-Shabaab overplayed its hand. in Somalia, and those people who were hijacking these commercial tankers and ships overplayed their hand as well.
Yeah, right,
Right.
exactly. But I wonder, why is it that in this situation with these people, there's other African nations that are not involved in this? They haven't made any steps to relieve these countries and these immigrants from going to Europe.
That's a very good question, and I have a feeling that it's one of the questions that needs to be addressed, and it requires some African statesmanship that appears to be lacking at this time. But I do think that some steps are being taken in that regard.
Okay, well, what steps are, and what countries are involved trying to
I
alleviate
really
this
don't have any detailed information on that.
on
but
what countries, but do you think that would be one approach to solve the problem?
I certainly do. I certainly do. I think that countries like Eritrea, Somalia, which right now
They're
is a
capable
failed
of doing
state.
This is true, right? They have the capability of doing it.
They certainly have the capability of doing it. They have two options, it seems to me: resolve the crises and resolve their domestic political crises, and meet and come up with a regional or continental solution that makes life at home more desirable than escaping to an unknown destination with unknown but criminal elements providing you transportation.
And you know the old thing about the United Nations, the African nations form like you have the United States. You think that'll ever happen, where all of those countries will? I've heard people talk about it, but the possibility of that happening.
My impression of most African societies is that they are so traditionally tribal that it would be difficult for them to combine in the way the EU has or the United States has.
Right.
Yeah.
You think that's almost an impossible thing? Well, you think in terms of in the Far East, with India and all of those countries in the China and all of them, they didn't form, but they developed a finance sort of thing to help them get into the financial market, knowing that Chinese, as far as the banking is concerned, that's in Hong Kong and all of that now.
Right, right. I think historically, an argument can be made that India is a federation of princely states. China was I think in the 19th century was a federation of armed states that finally coalesced after Japanese pressure had been subdued, military pressure had been subdued. And I think you can make a case that these larger countries did come to their political maturity through the route of confederation. The United States is another example.
Yeah, right.
There were about 10 years or so of articles of confederation.
Right.
Before it federated.
Before they actually that was one of the problems, but it was a problem they overcome. And I always thought that finance was the reason that helped it.
Well, I think that applies to states like Austria and Switzerland in the medieval period or before, that they were financial ventures first before they united and became the Eastern Republic, which is the German term for Austria.
So I just look at it and I just wonder, could in my lifetime, would that ever happen, where you get a united Africa to the point that, but you said it's tribal. Well, the same thing happens in the Middle East. a Muslim. Most people think in terms of Muslim, but it's so many different kinds of Muslim, right?
It's interesting you should say that, because when I look at the Middle East and I see conflict between Sunnis and Muslims,
Yeah, right.
we have Sunni Saudi Arabia attacking the Houthis, who are Shia, and I'm wondering. I know it's more intense than the conflict in Ireland, but you have Protestants
Right.
and Catholics in Ireland
Right.
who were,
That's an excellent example.
Yeah.
In Europe.
yeah, who had a great deal of strife.
Right, because really the Irish invented the car bomb. You remember during the time of strife over in Europe, a lot of people think car bombing is, but the Irish they actually invented. They were the ones I think brought England to their knees with those. They didn't have a big army, ships, or nothing like that, but they were very efficient in car bombing.
Yeah, and it was replicated in the Middle East.
Right.
Yes.
That's what I'm saying. They were trying to do the same thing in the Middle East, but it didn't work.
Well, they made it work later on. That's true.
Yeah.
The Israelis also used it against the British. The
Yeah.
British have had a great deal of experience with car bombs by their adversaries.
Yeah, because the adversaries didn't have the ships and the tanks
And
and
the
guns,
technology,
and
sure.
technology that's involved in what it takes. But most of the wars, a lot of people don't like to hear this. Most of the wars there are usually financed by Europeans and the United States, where the corporations are really making money and they're selling arms to these different groups.
That is a part of history that I've heard about but haven't studied. I suspect you're right. Certainly in the interwar years between World War I and II, there were a great deal of corporate investments in arming some of the belligerents for World War II.
Well, they had in Afghanistan, what was the Blackbirds or something? They had, United States had a group over there that were protecting the people that had investments over in
Right.
the same thing, you know, that occurred, but it approached it a different way. We were on the guise of helping people, but really the corporation was helping themselves.
Yeah, that was the first time we had tried that mode of warfare.
Yeah.
I'm wondering whether people will return to it. It'll be interesting to see.
Well, I don't know. I just so many things in the international world is going on now. But the subject matter we talked about, these people in Africa that are having difficulty migrating. Do you think what's going to be their solution? They're not. You think the Europeans are going to continue to allow them to come into the country, or just how are they going to take care of that problem?
This is going to tax European diplomacy, because European public opinion essentially says we don't need any more immigrants. But at the same time, the Europeans have advanced societies and they know how to settle these people and get them into productive lifestyles, if you will. There is no other place these people can go.
Well, that's what I say. What is the answer for that? You know, you can't keep them on the island forever. You know, like in some places they've, I think in Italy or something, they got some islands or something that temporary quarters now.
Yeah, I still think the answer is concerted diplomacy to build the prospects for peace, civil peace at home, so that these people can go back to their homes. They would be happier in their homes if their homes were essentially safe and productive to raise their children.
Right. And well, let's just say that's a big problem. And as far as the women are concerned, they are in a situation where they have is no fathers.
Well, yeah, civil strife takes a toll on the manpower.
Right.
And then the family is fatherless. If it's a traditional home, then the wife has not studied, and so she's leaving is illiterate but trying to make a life in an advanced European state.
Right.
That's not a good formula.
No, it's not a good formula, and I really don't see what are we doing in the situation. When I say we, I'm talking about the United States. Are we involved in it at all, supporting it or not supporting it?
I was listening to NPR
Quickly.
this morning, and there are some Americans who are freelancing, trying to rescue some of these destitute people in the Mediterranean Sea. So I think we're doing what we can.
Okay. I want to thank you for being here.
Pleasure.
Hey, you'll be back again. I got some things here on Alzheimer's Association, Mrs. Armstrong. She's a retired young lady, and actually they have a program that's coming up May 9th, and it's going to be at the Watkins Regional Park. And you know, a lot of us, you know, we hear about Alzheimer's and things, and we wonder what is all of that about, unless you directly. Here's some of the things that, first of all, you got to understand the disease, face uncertain future, and 1 family in 10 has loved ones with Alzheimer's. A lot of people don't realize, they hear about Alzheimer's, you know, and it's so many different things, that warning signs that you'll be able. Mrs. Armstrong had dedicated her life to this program, Alzheimer's Association, named one of the best health charities. And really, if you really want to get more information on the 20th, we're going to have Mrs. Armstrong on the show. But I thought this was the warning sign of care stress. Now, these are things: denial about the disease and its effect on persons who've been diagnosed. I know moms going to get better. They do things like that. Anger at the person with Alzheimer's, or others, that no effective treatment or cure currently is available. A social withdrawal from friends and activities one brought, hey, pleasure. I don't care about getting together with the neighbors anymore. In other words, you isolate yourself. Anxiety, depression, and exhaustion, sleepiness. You know, if you always sleeping, you know, sleeping 9, 10 hours, you better get a checkup. And irritability, you know, everything irritates you. I mean, a lot of us have that we don't have Alzheimer's, but that's one of the things. And lack of concentration. That's one of the things that I find that most people, the lack of concentration, things that they are able to do, you know, without any problems, you know, but they have to, things that they used to do automatically, you know, and they can't do it anymore. And then the health problems begin to take the tolls, both mentally and physically. Now, all you people out there, you know, you think about Alzheimer's, that's for somebody else, you know what I mean? But actually, Alzheimer's, this is very, very important. In this association, I'm taking the time now to introduce you to this program that about the Alzheimer's situation. And also, hey, the 13th, we're going to have some music here. Yes, the music is going to be one of those things that we all talked about, you know, we sit around, and this is regular piano, you know, and this, I went to one of his concerts, but he's did a terrific job. Okay, this has been Ed Brown, and don't forget, you know, next time when you see someone that has an Alzheimer's, volunteer. We need volunteers for this Alzheimer's. It's called TREBO, TREBO1.